Life has a funny way of revealing the truth about people, especially when there's money involved. I never thought my own sister would try to legally declare me dead, but I guess $12 million can make people do crazy things. I'm Emma Chen, 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. I was raised by my mom, Lisa Chen, after my father supposedly abandoned us before I was born. My half-sister, Rachel, came along when Mom remarried Jack Wilson when I was 4. We grew up in a modest home in Boston, and while we weren't poor, Mom always emphasized the importance of education and hard work. What none of us knew was that my biological father, David Thompson, had been searching for us for years. Mom had disappeared while pregnant with me, thinking she was protecting us from what she believed was his controlling family. The truth, as I would later learn, was far more complicated. But let me start with the day everything changed. I'd spent the last 5 years building my photography career, traveling to remote corners of the world capturing images for National Geographic and other major publications. My latest assignment took me to the Himalayan mountains, documenting traditional villages that were adapting to climate change. It was challenging work. No reliable phone service, spotty internet at best, and days of hiking between locations. Rachel had always been jealous of my glamorous career, though she never understood the countless nights I spent sleeping on frozen ground or the years of unpaid internships it took to get here. She chose a different path, working as a real estate agent and marrying Tom, a struggling day trader with expensive tastes. The last time I spoke to Mom was 3 months into my assignment. She sounded strange on our satellite phone call, emotional but trying to hide it. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice crackling through the poor connection. "There's something important I need to tell you when you get back. Something about your father." "Mom, you're breaking up," I replied, struggling to hear her through the static. "Is everything okay?" "Yes, just come home soon. I love you." Those were her last words to me. 2 weeks later, while I was in a remote village with no communication, Mom had a sudden heart attack. By the time I made it back to civilization and checked my messages, she had been gone for 10 days. I immediately began the long journey home, but travel from remote Nepal isn't simple. Delayed flights, missed connections, and monsoon weather stretched my return into a 3-week ordeal. What I didn't know was that Rachel had already set her plan in motion. You see, 6 months before Mom's death, she'd received a letter from a prestigious law firm. My biological father, David Thompson, had finally tracked us down. He was a federal judge now and had never stopped looking for us. More importantly, he'd recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer and wanted to make things right. He'd set up a trust fund for me, $12 million, plus properties in 3 states. Mom had been processing this information, trying to figure out how to tell me the truth about my father when she passed away. Rachel found the letter while going through Mom's papers. And that's when she saw her opportunity. While I was desperately trying to get home, Rachel was convincing everyone that I had died in a hiking accident in Nepal. She used her real estate connections to create false documentation, took advantage of the language barrier and poor communication with local authorities, and even held a memorial service with an empty casket. My poor sister, she'd sobbed to the mourners. At least she died doing what she loved. By the time I finally made it back to Boston, Rachel had already filed papers to claim the inheritance as my only surviving sibling. She even moved into one of the properties left in the trust. I'll never forget the moment I walked into my childhood home. Rachel was sitting in the living room with Tom, surrounded by papers from the law firm, when I opened the door with my key. The color drained from her face as if she'd seen a ghost, which in her mind she had. Emma," she stammered, dropping her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor Mom had been so proud of. You're supposed to be dead." I finished for her, setting down my weathered backpack. "Funny thing about that, I'm very much alive." Tom bolted from the room, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rachel's shock quickly turned to calculation. I could practically see the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to spin this. "Emma, thank God." She jumped up, arms open for a hug I didn't return. "We thought there was a report from Naples. We were devastated. I've been trying to handle all the legal matters for you to protect your interests." "Really?" I pulled out my phone, showing her the emails I discovered on Mom's computer. "Is that why you told the law firm I died in a climbing accident?" Why you've been trying to claim my inheritance? I can explain, she sputtered. It's not what you think. But I wasn't interested in her explanations. I'd spent the flight home doing my research, making calls, and uncovering every detail of her scheme. What I discovered wasn't just fraud, it was a calculated plan that had started even before Mom's death. What Rachel didn't know, what none of us had known, was that I wasn't the only one who had inherited my biological father's methodical nature and attention to detail, and I was about to show my dear sister exactly what that meant. Pack your bags, I said calmly, pulling out a formal-looking document. You have 24 hours to vacate this property, and Rachel? Don't bother trying to run. The FBI is already investigating the false death reports you filed. She lunged for the document in my hand, but I stepped back. You can't prove anything. It was a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect our family's interests. I smiled, thinking of the meeting I had scheduled for the next morning. Actually, I can prove everything. And you're about to learn exactly who you've been trying to steal from. What happened next would shake our family to its core, expose decades of secrets, and lead to a courtroom confrontation that nobody saw coming. But that's where the real story begins. The next morning, I walked into the federal courthouse in downtown Boston, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Rachel had spent the night calling everyone she knew, trying to find a lawyer willing to defend her misunderstanding. She'd even tried convincing our stepdad, Jack, to reason with me. Emma, please, he'd begged over the phone. Rachel made a mistake, but she's still your sister. No, Jack, I'd replied firmly. A mistake is accidentally damaging someone's car. She tried to legally declare me dead. What Rachel didn't know was that I'd already been in contact with Judge David Thompson's office. When I couldn't reach Mom during my trip, I finally opened that email I'd been avoiding. The one from the law firm explaining my father's search for me. After confirming Mom's death, I'd reached out to them. The security guard at the courthouse entrance did a double take when he checked my ID. Miss Chen, or should I say Miss Thompson, he said with a knowing smile. You look just like your father. I was directed to a private chamber where a tall, distinguished-looking man in his early 60s stood looking out the window. He turned as I entered, and I felt my breath catch. It was like looking at an older, male version of myself. We had the same sharp green eyes, the same way of tilting our heads when studying something. Emma, he breathed, taking a step forward but stopping himself. I've waited so long. Tears filled my eyes. Why didn't you find us sooner? I tried. God, I tried. He sank into a leather chair, gesturing for me to sit. Your mother. Lisa was trying to protect you, my family back then. My father, he was a controlling man. Lisa thought he tried to take you away from her, raise you as the proper Thompson here. She didn't know he was dying, that things were about to change. For the next hour, he filled in the gaps of my history. How he'd hired private investigators, how he'd finally reformed his family's old money attitudes as he rose through the legal ranks. How finding that first photo of me in National Geographic had given him hope. When I got sick, he continued, I knew I had to move faster. The inheritance was never about the money. It was about giving you the security I should have provided all along. A knock at the door interrupted us. Judge Thompson. They're ready. He squeezed my hand. Ready to face your sister? I nodded. More than ready. The courtroom was packed. News of a federal judge's long-lost daughter and attempted inheritance fraud had spread quickly. Rachel sat at the defendant's table, wearing her most modest black dress, clearly going for a grieving sister image. Her expensive lawyer whispered urgently in her ear. Then my father took the bench and everything changed. Rachel's face went from practiced sorrow to shock as she looked between Judge Thompson and me, finally seeing the obvious resemblance. Her lawyer's whispers became more frantic. This emergency hearing will address the fraudulent death declaration of Emma Chen, also known as Emma Thompson, and the attempted theft of her inheritance through false documentation. My father began, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench. Rachel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we request you recuse yourself due to obvious conflict of interest. Already arranged, my father replied calmly. Judge Martinez will be here momentarily to proceed. I simply wanted to be present for this opening statement. He turned to Rachel, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Ms. Wilson, when you attempted to have your sister declared dead, did you ever wonder why a federal judge would leave such a substantial inheritance to a photographer he never met? Rachel's carefully constructed facade cracked. I didn't. No, you didn't think, he continued. You saw an opportunity and took it, never questioning why I would track down your sister after 29 years. Never wondering why we have the same eyes, the same expressions. Never considering that I tried to steal from her. You were attempting to defraud a federal judge's daughter. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel's lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. Judge Martinez arrived and the real proceedings began. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel had forged documents, bribed officials in Nepal, and even created fake death certificates. She'd planned it all while Mom was still alive, waiting for an opportunity. But the biggest shock came when Tom, Rachel's husband, took the stand. She started planning it months ago, he testified, avoiding Rachel's murderous glare. When she found out about Emma's real father being Judge Thompson, she became obsessed. Said it wasn't fair that Emma got everything just for being born to the right father. She even suggested we should adopt Emma's future share of Mom's estate since dead people can't inherit. I watched my sister crumble as her husband betrayed her, as her schemes were exposed one by one. The woman who'd once been my childhood playmate, who borrowed my clothes and shared my secrets, was revealed as a stranger. The judge's verdict was swift and severe. Rachel was facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and filing false reports. She'd have to repay all the money she'd spent from the properties she'd illegally occupied. Her real estate license was suspended pending further investigation. But it was our stepfather's words in the hallway afterward that truly ended things. Your mother, Jack said, tears in his eyes. She wanted to tell you about Judge Thompson for years. She was so proud of you, Emma. Rachel, she knew that. She knew and still chose to do this. I can't defend her anymore. Rachel was led away in handcuffs, sobbing not from remorse, but from being caught. As she passed me, she hissed, "You think you're better than me now? With your fancy real father and millions?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and felt only pity. I was never competing with you, Rachel. You were the only one keeping score. The aftermath changed everything. Judge Thompson, Dad, and I began the slow process of building a relationship. He retired from the bench to focus on his health and making up for lost time. The treatments were working better than expected, giving us precious months to connect. I kept my photography career but established a foundation in Mom's name, providing scholarships for young photographers from underprivileged backgrounds. One of Dad's properties became a gallery showcasing their work. Rachel was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her crimes. Tom filed for divorce and cooperated with authorities in exchange for leniency. Jack visits her sometimes, but our family will never be the same. Last week, I found an old photo album in Mom's things. There was a picture of Rachel and me as kids, grinning with ice cream-covered faces, genuinely happy in each other's company. I thought about showing it to her during visiting hours, but decided against it. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. But other things, like my newfound relationship with my father, prove that it's never too late for a new beginning. Dad and I often sit in his study, sharing stories and making up for lost time. You know, he said recently, your mother was right to be worried about my family back then. But she was wrong about one thing. Running away didn't prevent you from becoming a Thompson. You've got our spirit, our sense of justice. I smiled, thinking of the long road that led us here. Maybe sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. And who am I? I'm Emma Chin Thompson, daughter of a mother who protected me and a father who never stopped searching. I'm a photographer who captures truth through my lens and a woman who learned that real family isn't about blood or money, it's about choice. As for Rachel, I heard she's writing a memoir in prison about family betrayal. I wish her well, but some stories don't need to be rewritten. Sometimes the truth is enough. The old grandfather clock in the lawyer's office ticked away mercilessly as I stared at the document in front of me, my hands trembling with a mixture of grief and disbelief. My grandfather's will lay before me, its words clear and unambiguous. To my beloved granddaughter Olivia, I leave my farmland in Texas, all 200 acres of it. I could feel my parents' disapproving stares burning into me from across the mahogany table. The tension in the room was suffocating, broken only by my mother's dramatic sigh. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. A worthless piece of land in the middle of nowhere. What was Dad thinking? My father nodded in agreement, his face twisted with disappointment. We could have used that beach house in Florida, or at least his stock portfolio. Instead, he leaves his most valuable assets to charity and gives you dirt. I remained silent, my fingers tracing the edges of the document. This land meant something to me. Every summer until I was 16, I had spent countless hours there with Grandpa, watching him work the land, listening to his stories, learning about every inch of that property. He had always said the land held secrets, treasures that most people were too blind to see. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paperwork and heated family discussions. My parents couldn't understand why I wouldn't sell the land immediately. "Be practical, Olivia," my mother would say, her voice filled with that familiar condescending tone. "What are you going to do with a farm? You're a software engineer living in Austin. This isn't some romantic movie about going back to your roots." But I held firm. That land was Grandpa's legacy to me, and I intended to honor it. Then came the water crisis. A severe drought hit the region, and suddenly, maintaining the farm became significantly more expensive. The well that had served the property for generations started running dry, and the cost of drilling a new one was astronomical. My parents saw their opportunity. "Olivia, darling," my mother cooed one evening, her voice honey-sweet, the tone she always used when she wanted something. "Your father and I have been thinking. The land is becoming a burden, isn't it? We have a friend, Marcus Davidson, who's willing to take it off your hands. He's offering $80,000 cash." I nearly choked on my coffee. $80,000? The land is worth at least 3 times that. "In theory, maybe," my father interjected. "But who's going to buy a dried-up farm in the middle of nowhere? Marcus is doing us a favor. Besides, you need the money for your startup idea, don't you?" They weren't entirely wrong. My tech startup was struggling to get off the ground, and initial investor meetings hadn't gone well. Every extra dollar counted, but something about this felt wrong. "Let me think about it," I said. The pressure mounted over the next few days. Daily calls, guilt trips, reminders of how much they'd sacrificed for my education. "We could have retired years ago if we hadn't paid for your engineering degree," became their favorite refrain. Finally, worn down by their relentless campaign, I agreed to meet with Marcus Davidson. He was a smooth-talking businessman in an expensive suit that seemed out of place in our small town. His handshake was too firm, his smile too practiced. "I'll make this simple," he said, sliding a check across the table. $80,000, cash. You can walk away from all this hassle today." I looked at the check, then at my parents' eager faces. 20 years of conditioning, of being taught to trust their judgment, of hearing "we know best" won out over my instincts. With a heavy heart, I signed the papers. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and a flurry of text messages. Confused and groggy, I opened my local news app to find out what was causing such a commotion. The headline made my blood run cold. "Major oil DPOC discovery in Davidson County. XP Varties estimate reserves worth millions." As I scrolled through the article, my hands shaking, one detail after another hit me like physical blows. The discovery had been made on my grandfather's farm, now Marcus Davidson's property. The initial survey suggested it was one of the largest oil deposits found in Texas in the last decade. My phone rang again. It was my mother. "Olivia," she wailed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You have to do something. That should have been our oil. Marcus knew. He must have known. We have to get the land back." I sat there, staring at my phone, memories flooding back. Grandpa's knowing smile when he talked about the land's secrets. The geological surveys I'd found in his study after he passed away. Surveys I'd meant to review but never got around to. He had known. He had always known. And now the land my parents had pressured me to sell for $80,000 was worth millions. My mother was still talking, her voice growing increasingly hysterical. "We're your parents, Olivia. You have to help us fix this. We can sue Marcus, claim he defrauded us. Just think about what we could do with that kind of money." I took a deep breath, years of suppressed emotions rising to the surface. The dismissal of my dreams, the constant pressure to follow their path, the endless criticism of my choices, it all crystallized in this moment. "No, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "I don't have to do anything." "What do you mean no? We're family. You owe us." I cut her off. "I think it's time we talked about what family really means. The aftermath of the oil discovery was like a tornado tearing through our small Texas town. My parents transformed from embarrassed former landowners into self-proclaimed victims overnight. Their carefully maintained social image cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. Marcus Davidson tricked us. My mother wailed at every social gathering. He knew about the oil surveys. He took advantage of our daughter. I watched from a distance as they launched their campaign to reclaim what was rightfully ours. They hired lawyers, filed complaints, and tried to rally the town against Marcus Davidson. But with each passing day, more details emerged that painted a different picture. The geological surveys hadn't been secret at all. In fact, several oil companies had been quietly buying up land in the area for months. My grandfather had known. He'd left detailed notes in his study, along with copies of preliminary oil surveys. Notes I would have found if I'd taken the time to go through his papers properly instead of letting my parents rush me into a sale. One morning, about a week after the discovery, my father showed up at my apartment unannounced. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usual polished appearance showing cracks. "We found a lawyer who thinks we have a case," he announced, walking in without waiting for an invitation. "We can prove Davidson took advantage of you. All we need is for you to testify that you were under duress when you signed the sale papers." I stood in my kitchen, coffee mug clutched in my hands like a shield. "You mean lie under oath?" "It's not lying," he insisted, pacing my small living room. "You were under pressure. We're your parents. We influenced your decision. That's practically the definition of duress." "The only pressure came from you and Mom," I said quietly. "The only people who rushed me into selling were you two." He stopped pacing, his face flushing red. "Are you saying this is our fault? We were trying to help you. That land was worthless." "Was it?" I set my mug down harder than necessary. "Or did you just want to control what happened to it, like you've tried to control everything else in my life?" "Control?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We gave you everything. Who paid for your engineering degree? Who supported you when your little startup failed to launch? Everything we've done has been for you." "No," I said, feeling strangely calm. "Everything you've done has been about you. About your image, your plans, your idea of success. When was the last time you actually listened to what I wanted?" The truth hung heavy in the air between us. My father's face went through a series of emotions. Anger, confusion, and finally, calculation. His voice softened. "Sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but this is about family. Think about what we could do with that oil money. Your startup could have proper funding. Your mother could finally retire. We could be set for life." I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder, one I'd been preparing for days. Inside were documents I'd gathered, including copies of my grandfather's notes about the oil surveys. "Did you know Grandpa suspected there was oil?" I asked, watching his face carefully. He'd left notes about it in his study, notes dated months before he passed away. My father's expression flickered. Just for a moment, but it was enough. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew there might be oil, but you still pushed me to sell quickly, didn't you?" "Olivia, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I spread the papers on my coffee table. "Because according to Grandpa's journals, he told you about the surveys last year. He wanted to wait for proper confirmation before doing anything. That's why he left the land to me, isn't it? Because he knew you'd try to sell it immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face had gone pale, his usual confident demeanor crumbling. "Your mother and I," he started, then stopped. "We needed the money. The recession hit us harder than we let on. Our retirement fund." "Stop." I held up my hand. "Just stop. No more excuses. No more manipulation. Get out." "Olivia, please. Get out." After he left, I sat in my apartment for a long time, looking at the scattered papers on my coffee table. Years of memories surfaced. Every time they dismissed my dreams, every time they used money as a weapon, every time they'd made me feel small for not following their plans. The next day, my mother tried a different approach. She invited me to lunch at my favorite cafe, ordered my favorite dessert, and spent 20 minutes talking about how worried she was about my father's health. "The stress is killing him," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "He barely sleeps. If only we could resolve this situation." I cut her off mid-manipulation. "I've made a decision," I said, pulling out a document of my own. I'm filing a formal statement with the district attorney's office about what happened with the sale." Her eyes lit up. "Yes, that's exactly what we need to. I'm going to tell them everything," I continued, "including how you and Dad knew about the potential oil deposits months ago. How you pressured me to sell quickly, below market value, to your friend Marcus." The color drained from her face. "You wouldn't dare. We're your parents." Parents are supposed to protect their children, not exploit them. I stood up, leaving my untouched dessert on the table. "I've already spoken with the DA's office. They're very interested in the timing of everything. You're making a terrible mistake," she called after me as I walked away. "You'll regret this." But for the first time in my life, I felt no regret at all. The investigation that followed unveiled a web of deception that shocked our small community. It turned out Marcus Davidson wasn't just a friend of my parents. He was their business partner in several failed ventures. They had planned to use their influence to get me to sell the land cheaply, then share in the oil profits through a complex series of shell companies. The district attorney's office built a solid case. Marcus Davidson faced charges of fraud and insider trading. My parents weren't charged. I couldn't bring myself to push for that. But their reputation in the community was shattered. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. My startup, the one my parents had always dismissed as a waste of time, caught the attention of a major tech investor. Without the weight of my parents' constant criticism and manipulation, I was finally able to focus on building something for myself. 1 year after the oil discovery, I sat in my new office in downtown Austin, looking out over the city skyline. My tech company had just secured its second round of funding, and we were expanding rapidly. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We miss you. Can we talk? Family should stick together." I thought about all the times they'd used the word family as a weapon, all the times they'd wielded their financial support like a chain to bind me to their will. Then I thought about my grandfather, who had seen something in me worth nurturing, worth protecting. I typed a simple reply. "I am not the daughter you wanted. I'm the daughter who finally broke free." Then I blocked their number. Later that evening, as I drove past the old farm, now a bustling oil field, I didn't feel the anger or bitterness I'd expected. Instead, I felt gratitude. My grandfather's last gift hadn't been the land itself, but the opportunity to finally stand up for myself, to break free from the manipulation and control that had defined my life for so long. The oil was worth millions, but my freedom was priceless. Today, 3 years later, my tech company is valued at over $50 million. I've started a foundation that helps young entrepreneurs break free from toxic family dynamics and pursue their dreams. Every time I review a grant application, I think about that moment in the lawyer's office, staring at my grandfather's will. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or land or oil. It's the courage to stand up for yourself, to break free from those who would hold you back, even if they share your blood. My parents still live in town. I hear they've started attending church regularly, trying to rebuild their reputation. Sometimes I see them at local restaurants or shopping centers. They always pause, as if waiting for me to approach, to offer forgiveness, to return to the fold. But I keep walking, head held high, remembering my grandfather's words from long ago. "The real treasure isn't what's in the ground, Olivia. It's having the strength to be true to yourself, no matter what anyone else thinks." He was right. The oil made Marcus Davidson a millionaire, but I gained something far more valuable: my freedom, my self-respect, and the knowledge that I am stronger than anyone, even my parents, ever imagined. Last week, I received an invitation to a family reunion. On the back, my mother had written a personal note. "We've changed. Please come home." I took the invitation and dropped it in my shredder, remembering the day I signed away that land. Sometimes the hardest lesson to learn is that not all family deserves a second chance. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away and build your own legacy. The old farm may be pumping oil now, but I'm no longer bound by what could have been. I've built something of my own, something my parents can't manipulate or control. And that's worth more than all the oil in Texas. The day of the will reading changed everything. I sat in the polished conference room of Harrison and Associates, my simple black dress a stark contrast to my sister Olivia's designer suit. She perched confidently in her chair, manicure fingers drumming against the mahogany table. while I tried to make myself smaller and visible, a habit I perfected over the years. To my daughter Olivia, Mr. Harrison Reed, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, I leave our investment portfolio valued at approximately $8 million. Our summer home in the Hamptons and all associated properties. He paused as Olivia's perfectly painted lips curved into a satisfied smile. I held my breath, waiting. After Mom and Dad's accident, I'd spent weeks wondering what they'd leave me. Maybe their art collection, or perhaps Dad's vintage car collection. I'd always loved those cars, spending countless afternoons helping him restore them in the garage. To my daughter Sarah, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice oddly hesitant, I leave Golden Dragon Restaurant, including all equipment and associated business assets. The room fell silent. I felt my heart stop. Golden Dragon. Our family's failing Chinese restaurant. The one that hadn't turned a profit in 5 years. The one Dad had called his greatest disappointment just months before the accident. Olivia's laugh shattered the silence. Oh, this is perfect, she said, not even trying to hide her amusement. Have fun with your inheritance, little sister. I heard the health department is due for another inspection soon. I sat there, numb, as Mr. Harrison finished reading. The rest was a blur of signatures and condolences. I barely registered Aunt Margaret's pitying pat on my shoulder or Uncle James' awkward attempt at encouragement. Well, at least it's something, right? Later that evening, I stood alone in Golden Dragon's empty dining room. The red and gold wallpaper, once vibrant, had faded to dull shadows of their former glory. Dusty paper lanterns hung motionless from the ceiling, and the bronze dragon statue by the entrance, the one that had terrified me as a child, seemed to mock me with its tarnished grin. What am I supposed to do with this? I whispered to the empty room. The restaurant had been my grandmother's pride and joy when she first opened it 40 years ago. Back then, it had been the crown jewel of Chinatown, with lines stretching around the block. Celebrities would wait weeks for a reservation, desperate to taste Grandma Ming's legendary dishes. But after she passed away, everything changed. Dad tried to keep it going, but without Grandma's touch, the magic was gone. The recipes weren't the same. The customers stopped coming. What was once a bustling landmark became just another struggling restaurant in a sea of competitors. I walked into the kitchen, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The industrial stoves stood cold and lifeless. Pots and pans hung from their hooks like sleeping soldiers. This was what my parents thought I deserved, their greatest failure, while Olivia got millions. Enjoying your inheritance? I spun around to find Olivia leaning against the doorframe, still in her designer suit from the well reading. Her smile was sharp enough to cut. What are you doing here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shrugged, running a perfectly manicured finger along a dusty counter. Just wanted to see how you were settling in. You know, I could take this place off your hands. Turn it into something useful, maybe a boutique or a wine bar. It's not for sale, I said automatically, but I wasn't sure why I was defending it. Olivia laughed. Oh, come on, Sarah. Let's be realistic. You've never run a business in your life. You're a kindergarten teacher, for God's sake. This place was barely surviving when Dad ran it. How long do you think you'll last? She was right, of course. What did I know about running a restaurant? The most cooking I ever done was making mac and cheese for my students' class parties. Just think about it, Olivia said, turning to leave. My offer stands until the health department shuts you down. Shouldn't take more than a month or two. After she left, I sank into one of the old dining chairs, letting my head fall into my hands. Why had they done this to me? Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final punishment for choosing teaching over joining the family business like Olivia had? The chair creaked beneath me, another thing that needed fixing. I shifted, and something caught my eye. There was a loose floorboard under the table, its corner slightly raised above the others. Curious, I knelt down and pulled at it. The board came away easily, revealing a small space beneath, and there, wrapped in faded red silk, was a book. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. The cover was worn leather, the pages yellowed with age. When I opened it, my grandmother's familiar handwriting filled the pages. Chinese characters flowed across the paper, interspersed with English notes in the margins. My dearest Sarah, began a letter tucked into the front cover. If you're reading this, it means you found my most precious possession, my recipe book. Not just any recipes, but the true secrets of Golden Dragon's success. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding. This wasn't just any recipe book. This was Grandma Ming's personal cookbook, the one that held all her secret recipes, the ones that had made Golden Dragon famous, the ones that died with her, or so everyone thought. As I flipped through the pages, I found not just recipes, but detailed notes about techniques, secret ingredients, and even business strategies. Everything Grandma had learned in her decades of running the restaurant was documented here. But more than that, I found letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me, dated throughout the years before she died. Letters she'd written but never sent, sharing her wisdom, her dreams for the restaurant, and her belief in me. My sweet Sarah, one read, "You may not know it yet, but you have the heart of a true chef. I see it in the way your eyes light up when I cook, in how you always ask about the stories behind each dish. Your sister may have your father's head for business, but you, my dear, have my soul for cooking." Tears blurred my vision as I read letter after letter. All this time, Grandma had seen something in me that even I hadn't recognized. A noise from outside startled me. Quickly, I wrapped the book back in its silk cloth and hugged it to my chest. For the first time since the will reading, I felt something other than despair. Maybe this wasn't a punishment after all. Maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where I was meant to be. I looked around the kitchen with new eyes. Yes, it was run down. Yes, it needed work. But underneath the dust and neglect, I could see what it once was, what it could be again. Grandma's last letter echoed in my mind. "Remember, Sarah, success isn't just about the food. It's about love, tradition, and the courage to believe in yourself when no one else does." I tucked the book safely into my bag and stood up straight. Tomorrow, I would start reading through those recipes. Tomorrow, I would begin bringing Golden Dragon back to life. Let Olivia laugh. Let her think she got the better inheritance. I had something much more valuable than money. I had Grandma's legacy, and I was about to prove to everyone that they had underestimated me for the last time. That night, I stayed up until dawn, poring over Grandma's recipe book. Her elegant handwriting filled page after page with not just ingredients and measurements, but stories, secrets, and wisdom passed down through generations. Each recipe was a piece of history, a fragment of our family's legacy that everyone thought was lost forever. But what caught my attention most wasn't just the recipes, it was her detailed notes about running the business. Grandma hadn't just been a talented chef, she'd been a brilliant entrepreneur. She documented everything: which suppliers gave the best deals, how to negotiate prices, even psychological tricks for handling difficult customers. The secret, she wrote, isn't just in the food. It's in making people feel like they're part of something special. The next morning, I called in sick to my teaching job. Then the next day, and the next. After a week, I submitted my resignation. My principal was understanding but concerned. "Are you sure about this, Sarah? Teaching is a stable career." I wasn't sure about anything except that I had to try. The first month was brutal. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the office. Every morning, I practiced making Grandma's signature dishes, following her detailed instructions. Dozens of dumplings ended up in the trash before I got the pleating technique right. My hands were covered in burns from the wok, and my arms ached from kneading endless batches of noodle dough. But slowly, something magical started happening. The aromas that filled the kitchen began to match my childhood memories. The flavors grew more complex, more authentic. When I finally reopened Golden Dragon, I started small, just lunch service, with a limited menu of Grandma's most famous dishes. The first day, only 3 tables came in. But those 3 tables changed everything. "This tastes just like how Ming used to make it," an elderly man said, tears in his eyes as he ate the mapo tofu. "I've been coming here for 40 years, and this is the first time since she passed that it tastes right." Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. By the end of the week, we had a line out the door. Local food bloggers started posting about the miraculous revival of Golden Dragon. "The legendary flavors are back," one wrote, "as if Ming herself has returned to the kitchen." Of course, success brought attention I didn't want. Olivia showed up one morning wearing another designer suit and a skeptical expression. "I hear you're actually getting customers," she said, studying the now spotless dining room. "Did you hire a new chef?" "I do all the cooking," I replied, proud of how steady my voice was. She laughed. "You? Since when do you know how to cook Chinese food?" "Since Grandma taught me." I didn't mention the recipe book. That was my secret, my advantage. "Well," she sniffed, "don't get too excited. Any restaurant can have a good first month. Let's see how long you last. But we didn't just last, we thrived. Within 6 months, Golden Dragon was doing better than it had in decades. We expanded to dinner service, then added a second floor for private events. I hired more staff, trained them personally in Grandma's techniques. Then came the turning point. A famous food critic visited unannounced. His review went viral. Golden Dragon isn't just a restaurant, it's a time machine. Each dish transports you back to the golden age of New York's Chinatown. Whatever magic Ming once wielded in her kitchen has been reborn. After that, everything exploded. Celebrities started coming in. Reservations were booked months in advance. People offered thousands of dollars for our secret recipes. I used the profits to renovate, but kept the essential character of the place. The red and gold wallpaper, the paper lanterns, even the old bronze dragon statue. They weren't just decorations anymore. They were part of our story. 1 year after reopening, I got an offer from a major restaurant group. They wanted to open Golden Dragon locations in other cities. The contract was for $10 million, plus ongoing royalties. I was in the middle of negotiating when Olivia burst into my office, waving a newspaper. The headline read, "Golden Dragon Empire Expanding Nationwide. Local Restaurants Remarkable Revival." "How did you do it?" she demanded. This was supposed to be worthless. Dad said this place was nothing but a money pit. I looked at my sister, really looked at her. Despite her expensive clothes and perfect makeup, she seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than she'd once been. Maybe Dad just didn't know the real value of what he had, I said quietly. She slammed her hands on my desk. "This isn't fair. I got the money, the properties. I was supposed to be the successful one." "Life's funny that way," I replied, turning back to my work. But Olivia wasn't done. She went to our aunt and uncle, claiming I must have somehow tricked our parents, that I had stolen documents or business plans. She even tried to challenge the will, arguing that Dad wasn't in his right mind when he left me the restaurant. It all came to a head at the next family gathering. Aunt Margaret's birthday celebration. The entire extended family was there, including all the cousins who had smirked at my worthless inheritance. Olivia had too much to drink and started loudly talking about how unfair everything was. "She's just a teacher," she slurred. "She doesn't deserve this success." I stood up slowly, commanding everyone's attention. "You want to know why Golden Dragon is successful now?" I pulled out Grandma's recipe book, the first time I'd shown it to anyone. Because unlike you, Olivia, I didn't just see a failing business. I saw our family's legacy. The room fell silent as I told them about finding the book, about all those nights practicing Grandma's recipes, about every burn and cut and exhausted morning that led to where I was now. "You thought you got the better inheritance," I said to Olivia, but Grandma knew what she was doing when she hid this book. She knew someday someone would come along who cared about more than just money. Aunt Margaret picked up the book with trembling hands. "I remember these dishes," she whispered. Ming never would share her secrets with anyone. "Except she did," I said softly. She shared them with me because she knew I would understand what they really meant. That night changed everything. Suddenly, relatives who had dismissed me were calling to invest in my expansion plans. Cousins who had laughed at my bad luck were begging for jobs at the new locations. And Olivia? She tried one last time to get a piece of my success. "We could be partners," she suggested, cornering me after a family dinner. "I have business experience, connections. Think how much faster we could grow." I looked at my sister, remembering her laughter at the will reading, her constant belittling, her attempts to undermine me. "You know what the most important ingredient is in any recipe?" I asked her. "Heart. And you, Olivia, have never had that." 2 years after finding Grandma's recipe book, Golden Dragon had grown into a $50 million empire. We had locations in 12 cities, with more opening every month. Each restaurant had the same red and gold wallpaper, the same paper lanterns, the same commitment to doing things exactly as Grandma had taught me. The original location remained my favorite. I still cooked there sometimes, especially on quiet mornings before we opened. In those moments, standing in the kitchen with the smell of ginger and garlic in the air, I could almost feel Grandma beside me. The bronze dragon statue still stood guard at the entrance, but it didn't mock me anymore. Instead, it reminded me of how far I'd come, of how sometimes the things we think are worthless turn out to be the most valuable of all. Last week, I received an offer to buy the entire Golden Dragon chain for over $100 million. The letter sat unopened on my desk for days before I finally read it. My answer was simple: not for sale. Because this was never about money. It was about proving that success isn't just measured in dollars and cents. It's measured in the love you put into something, in the traditions you preserve, in the legacy you build. Olivia still doesn't understand. She's sold most of her inheritance now, trying to start her own businesses, chasing the next big thing. But she's missing what Grandma knew all along, that true success comes from honoring what came before you while building something new. The recipe book sits in a special display case in my office now, protected behind glass, but open to a random page. Today it shows Grandma's orange chicken recipe, and at the bottom, in her elegant handwriting, are the words that have become my life's motto. Remember, success is not about what you gain, but what you give back. Cook with love, serve with pride, and never forget where you came from. I've added my own note below it, and never let anyone tell you what you're worth. The invitation to Anderson Manufacturing's 50th anniversary gala sat on my desk, its silver embossing catching the morning light in my penthouse office. 5 years had passed since that fateful family dinner when my father had announced his succession plan. Everything to my brother David, nothing for me. Ms. Anderson. My assistant Michael appeared at the door. The latest reports on Anderson Manufacturing just came in. Their financial situation is, well, you should see for yourself. I took the tablet he offered, scanning the numbers with a satisfied smile. The company my grandfather had built, the one my father had given entirely to my more capable brother, was now drowning in debt. How much do they need? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Minimum of $50 million to avoid bankruptcy. They've approached every major bank in the city, but given their current management, Michael trailed off diplomatically. I nodded, turning to look out at the Manhattan skyline. From my office in the Morrison building, which I owned, I could actually see Anderson Manufacturing's headquarters, a once proud structure now shadowed by newer, more successful buildings. 5 years ago, I sat at our family's dining table, listening to my father explain why David deserved everything. The company needs strong leadership, he'd said, not meeting my eyes. Traditional leadership. David understands this business. You're too focused on all these modern ideas about technology and innovation. I'd spent years preparing for this moment, earning my MBA while David barely passed college. I'd worked every summer learning the business from the ground up while he played golf with Dad's friends. I developed a complete modernization plan that could have transformed Anderson Manufacturing into a technology leader. But I was the daughter, and in my father's world, that made me less qualified than my brother, who'd never shown any real interest in the company beyond its profits. You'll get a generous salary, of course, my father had added, as if that made it better. Vice President of Creative Services, a perfect position for someone with your unique perspectives. I declined the consolation prize. That night, I walked away from Anderson Manufacturing, from my family's expectations, from everything they thought they knew about me. What they didn't know was that I'd seen this coming. For 2 years prior, I'd been quietly building my own company, Phoenix Technologies. While they dismissed my modern ideas, I was revolutionizing the very industry they thought they understood. Michael, I turned back to my assistant. What's our current market position compared to Anderson Manufacturing? He pulled up another report. Phoenix Technologies' market cap is currently $4.2 billion. Anderson's is $180 million and falling. I smiled, remembering David's condescending pat on my shoulder the night of the announcement. Don't worry, sis. You can still have an office down the hall from mine. Nalga's office was worth less than my company spent on coffee each year. The real irony? My father and brother had no idea I was behind Phoenix Technologies. To the business world, Phoenix was run by the mysterious E.A. Stone, who never appeared in public. To my family, I was just Emma Anderson, founder of a small tech consulting firm that somehow managed to stay afloat. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Darling, you are coming to the gala, aren't you? David has some very important investors attending. Try to look professional. I glanced at the St. Laurent suit I was wearing, worth more than David's car. Don't worry, Mom, I wouldn't miss it. The story of how I built Phoenix Technologies while maintaining my facade of modest success is one of careful planning and quiet satisfaction. After walking away from Anderson Manufacturing, I used my savings and a small inheritance from my grandmother to launch my first product, a revolutionary inventory management system that quickly caught the attention of major retailers. Within 18 months, Phoenix had secured contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. By year 3, we were leading the industry in innovation, all while Anderson Manufacturing clung to outdated methods and watched their market share steadily decline. I kept my name off all company documents, operating through a series of holding companies. In family gatherings, I talked about my small consulting business, letting them believe I was barely getting by. Meanwhile, Phoenix Technologies was transforming the industry my father thought I couldn't understand. Ms. Anderson. Michael interrupted my thoughts. The acquisition team just sent over the final analysis. Anderson Manufacturing's patents alone are worth more than their current market value. If we move now, we could buy them for pennies on the dollar, I finished. Have the team prepare the documents, but keep everything under Phoenix Holdings. I don't want anyone making the connection yet. I picked up the gala invitation again, running my fingers over the embossed Anderson Manufacturing logo. In 2 days, my family would be celebrating 50 years of business success, unaware that their company's survival depended on the daughter they dismissed. The path that led here wasn't about revenge. It was about proving something to myself. While my father and brother focused on maintaining what my grandfather had built, I'd look to the future. While they clung to tradition, I embraced innovation. While they assumed leadership was about authority, I proved it was about vision. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from David. Hey sis, heard your little consulting business landed a decent client. Maybe now you can afford a new car. I looked out my window at my private helipad, thinking of the fleet of vehicles in my underground garage. Thanks for the concern, big brother. I'm managing. That night, as I reviewed the acquisition documents in my penthouse, I thought about the moment that truly set all this in motion. It wasn't the dinner where my father gave everything to David. It was 2 weeks before that, when I presented my modernization plan to the board. I'd spent months preparing it, comprehensive analysis of market trends, detailed implementation strategies, projected ROI that would have doubled the company's value within 5 years. David had smirked through the entire presentation. This isn't a college project, Emma, he'd said afterward. This is real business. Leave the big decisions to those who understand them. Now, 5 years later, every prediction in that presentation had come true. Anderson Manufacturing had lost ground to more innovative competitors, most notably to Phoenix Technologies. Their refusal to adapt had brought them to the brink of bankruptcy, and their salvation or destruction rested in the hands of the daughter they deemed unworthy of the family legacy. I picked up a framed photo from my desk, the last picture taken of my grandfather before he passed. He was standing in front of the original Anderson Manufacturing building, pride shining in his eyes. He'd built something extraordinary from nothing, through innovation and forward thinking. You would have understood, I whispered to his image. You would have seen what they couldn't. My grandfather had wanted to give me the company. I found his original will after he died, but by then my father had already convinced him to change it. The company needs a man's touch, he told my dying grandfather. Emma's too soft, too full of impractical ideas. Those impractical ideas had built Phoenix Technologies into something far greater than Anderson Manufacturing had ever been. And in 2 days, at the anniversary gala, everything would change. My phone buzzed one last time, an email from our acquisition team, final details confirmed. Anderson Manufacturing's loans will be called in next week. They'll have 48 hours to find financing or face immediate bankruptcy. I closed my laptop, walking to the window that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, my father and brother were probably planning their grand anniversary celebration, unaware that their company's fate rested in the hands of the daughter they'd written off. Sometimes success isn't about getting what you want. Sometimes it's about building something better than what you were denied. The plaza's grand ballroom sparkled with false prosperity as Anderson Manufacturing's 50th anniversary celebration began. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over hundreds of guests, most of them unaware that the company they were celebrating would be facing bankruptcy in less than a week. I watched my brother David work the room, his smile growing more strained with each conversation. He'd spent a fortune on this party, money the company couldn't afford, hoping to convince potential investors that Anderson Manufacturing was still a force to be reckoned with. "Emma, darling," my mother's voice carried across the room. "Come meet the Hamiltons. Their investment firm might be interested in helping the company." I smiled, knowing that the Hamiltons firm was actually a subsidiary of Phoenix Technologies. They were here on my orders, playing their part in tonight's carefully orchestrated revelation. "Mrs. Hamilton," I shook her hand, maintaining my role as the struggling consultant. "I hear you're interested in manufacturing technologies." "Very interested," she replied, hiding a knowing smile. "Though we'll need to speak with E.A. Stone before making any decisions. I believe they're attending tonight." David, who had joined our group, practically bounced with excitement. "E.A. Stone is coming? The founder of Phoenix Technologies?" "Oh yes," Mrs. Hamilton nodded. "In fact, I believe they're already here." I checked my watch. Almost time. My team was in position. The documents were prepared. And in exactly 3 minutes, Anderson Manufacturing's largest creditor would be calling in their loans. Right on cue, David's phone rang. I watched the color drain from his face as he listened to the caller. "That's impossible," he stammered. "The loan isn't due for—" "Yes, I understand, but no, please, we just need more time." He ended the call, looking shell-shocked. Our father hurried over, sensing disaster. "What's wrong?" he demanded. "Sterling Bank is calling in our loans." David's voice shook. "All of them. We have 48 hours to pay $50 million or they'll force us into bankruptcy." The news spread through the room like wildfire. Board members huddled in corners, whispered conversations grew urgent, and my father aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Maybe Phoenix Technologies would be interested in acquiring us," one board member suggested desperately. "They've been expanding their manufacturing division." "If only we could speak with E.A. Stone," David said, loosening his tie. "I heard they're here tonight." "They are," I said calmly, setting down my champagne glass. "In fact, you've been speaking with them all evening." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. "What are you talking about?" my father demanded. I nodded to Michael, who began distributing folders to the board members. "My name is Emma Anderson Stone. I'm the founder and CEO of Phoenix Technologies, and I now control the majority of Anderson Manufacturing's debt." The silence turned deafening. David's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. My father gripped the back of a chair for support. That's impossible," he finally managed. "You run a small consulting firm." "No," I corrected him. "I built a $4.2 billion technology company while letting you believe I was struggling. Because you and David needed to learn some hard truths about success, innovation, and judging people's capabilities." All this time, David whispered, "Phoenix Technologies' market dominance, the patents, the innovations, that was all you?" "Remember my impractical modernization plan?" I asked. "The one you dismissed 5 years ago? I implemented every part of it at Phoenix. While you were clinging to outdated methods, I was building the future." My father found his voice, anger overtaking shock. "So this is revenge? Destroying your family's company?" "Actually," I opened one of the folders. "This is salvation. Phoenix Technologies is offering to acquire Anderson Manufacturing at a very generous premium, considering its current situation. We'll modernize the facilities, retrain the workers, and implement the changes that should have been made years ago." "And us?" David asked quietly. "You'll be offered positions commensurate with your actual abilities, not your family connections. Whether you succeed or fail will depend entirely on your own merit." The next hour was a blur of lawyers, documents, and wounded pride. My father signed the acquisition papers without meeting my eyes. David sat in stunned silence, his dreams of corporate glory crumbling around him. Later that night, as shell-shocked guests filed out, my father approached me. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why let us think you were failing all these years?" I considered the question carefully. "Because you and David needed to understand that success isn't about titles or traditions. It's about vision, innovation, and recognizing potential, even when it doesn't look the way you expect it to." He nodded slowly, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "And now? What happens to the company?" "Now it becomes what it always could have been. Something innovative, forward-thinking, built on merit rather than inheritance." I touched his arm gently. "Grandfather built something remarkable. You and David nearly destroyed it trying to preserve the past. I'm going to save it by embracing the future." Over the next few months, Anderson Manufacturing transformed. David started in product development, finally applying himself when he realized his position wasn't guaranteed. My father retired but stayed on as an advisor, slowly learning to see beyond his old prejudices. The original Anderson Manufacturing building still stands, but now it's part of a modern technology campus. In the lobby, beside my grandfather's portrait, hangs a framed copy of my original modernization plan. A reminder that sometimes the best way to honor a legacy is to reinvent it. Last week, during a board meeting, a young engineer presented an innovative proposal. Some of the old guards started to dismiss her ideas, but I stopped them. 5 years ago, I said, I presented a similar proposal and was told to leave the big decisions to those who understand them. Now Phoenix Technologies leads the industry, while those who dismissed innovation nearly lost everything. Let's not make the same mistake twice. The proposal was approved unanimously. Success, I've learned, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right, even if that means letting people underestimate you until the perfect moment to show them exactly what you're capable of. My father still struggles with a new reality sometimes. Last month, he questioned one of my strategic decisions during a board meeting. Trust me, Dad, I said quietly. I built something bigger than Anderson Manufacturing while you thought I was failing. Imagine what I can do now that I don't have to hide. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded, finally seeing me not as his daughter who needed protection, but as the leader who had saved his company's legacy. The original Anderson Manufacturing sign still hangs on the building, but now it's paired with the Phoenix Technologies logo. A reminder that sometimes the greatest tribute to a family legacy isn't preserving it exactly as it was, but transforming it into something even more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined.